Tarde. Bem-vindos à segunda sessão de hoje do Seminário Transmuseu, que encerra os nossos 3 dias de trabalho. Eu gostaria de me desculpar por esse atraso que houve, mas será recompensado no fim com essas gelatinas que vocês já podem ver aqui. O Seminário Transmuseu, ele, nessa sua segunda edição, vem reforçar a ideia que deu origem ao Transmuseu no ano passado, que é dar voz para vários setores do museu que muitas vezes não têm protagonismo na compreensão de como é complexo lidar com uma instituição que, como o MAM, se dedica à arte experimental, enfrenta desafios de ampliação de público, de mudar a imagem do museu dentro da cultura brasileira, que historicamente foi uma instituição socialmente excludente, e esse esforço do MAM, ele só é possível porque diversas áreas do museu enfrentam os desafios do experimentalismo. Hoje de manhã a gente teve uma mesa sobre as questões jurídicas ligadas às novas circulações de imagem por esse mundo virtual, à apropriação das imagens. E hoje à tarde a gente traz ao público uma nova linha que o MAM está desenvolvendo de arte e gastronomia. Nós iniciamos a trazer essa linha ao público quando da exposição do Gordon Matta Clark aqui no museu, quando pela primeira vez a comida servida ao público do vernissagem era diretamente ligada à exposição. E desde então, todos os cardápios das vernissagens do MAM têm tido um sentido conexo àquilo que estava sendo exibido. E no ano passado, a gente deu um passo decisivo dentro dessa linha de arte e gastronomia, quando nós fizemos aqui no MAM os encontros de arte e gastronomia, que foram curados pelo chefe Laurent Sodot, que está nos acompanhando hoje aqui, e por mim. A gente construiu uma cozinha de verdade na Sala Paulo Figueiredo e convidamos chefes e artistas para trabalharem ao vivo, né, dentro dessa situação de uma sala expositiva na qual era produzida e servida comida sem nenhuma relação com o modelo do restaurante, ou seja, numa situação de completa e radical liberdade. Hoje a gente vai dar prosseguimento a essa linha que é nova para o MAM, né? Nós acabamos de editar o catálogo e vemos assim o inesperado do processo agora, e nós resolvemos então trazer isso também ao público com essa mesa sobre a experiências de gastronomia no museu. E para isso nós convidamos o Earlwyn Covington, que é professor da Escola de Artes e Design de Reims, na França, na cadeira de Food Design, que é uma disciplina que tem apenas 12 anos. Ela foi inventada recentemente, é uma interface entre arte, design, gastronomia e a grande indústria. E, nesse momento, está sendo reconhecida por essa escola como uma pós-graduação. E outras escolas de design no mundo estão começando a reconhecer essa como uma área de conhecimento e de formação profissional. E convidamos também o Bompas, que pertence a uma dupla, Bompas Parr, na Grã-Bretanha, que tem inovado naquilo que é a apresentação, a produção e a experimentação gastronômica, sobretudo colaborando com profissionais das mais diversas áreas, meteorologistas, neurolinguistas, arquitetos, e com isso tem ganhado um espaço crescente na Grã-Bretanha, com experiências que ainda são inclassificáveis. Então, nós vamos começar com o Earlwyn Covington, depois o Bompas, e depois eu não tenho a menor ideia do que vai acontecer. Então, bom apetite.
I'd like to begin with stating, as some here have already done before me, in one way or another, that I truly believe that the 21st century has come upon cultural institutions in such a radical way that the relationship to the visitor is no longer what it once was. It has been transformed indefinitively. And in that spirit, I invite you to just listen and watch. The images that will play behind me are non-hierarchical and just serve as texture or taste for my words. It's no longer necessary to consider, like Pierre Bourdieu did in his statistical study of museum visitors in the late 1960s, that socioeconomics dictate the typical visitor. Museums indeed have come a long way and have been not only determined but courageous in bringing together projects that will touch the broadest range of the general public. Quite evidently, these institutions have come about and have been created within a hierarchy of culture based on the socioeconomic politics of a given country and of a given time. Let's take, for example, education, or the education of a young artist or a young designer at an art or design school. In France, the public system is basically free, but it is very difficult for students to enter one of the 41 publicly funded art schools, and the competitive exams usually require at least 2 years of preparation. On average, there are usually only 50 or 60 spots, but over 4,000 candidates depending on the school. With new reforms over the past 2 years, these institutions have become independent cultural entities and will have to fund 30% of their budgets from the private sector. This churns the stomach of the French system, especially in the arts. Nevertheless, the way that art schools can set themselves apart in this incredibly and newly competitive context is by having exceptionally creative, innovative, and risk-taking disciplines created by passionate professors. And what such discipline that was created over 10 years ago at a small provincial art school in the Champagne-Ardenne region of France is a discipline called food design, and it was the first. It was at this school, the ISA de France, that I met in 2009 Marc Bretillot, a pioneer in food design. Since then, the school, under the direction of a remarkable directress, Claire Payot, has created a post-diploma program giving credits on a European and international level to the importance of food design and its emergence as a valuable discipline in an art school. Before I begin, I'd like to open this discussion with a text that Marc Bretillot wrote about a recent museum experience. The setting is Paris, it's summer, there's a very long line to see yet another amazing and extraordinary exhibition. Again, Paris, you know. Crack. A candy bar is hidden under my jacket, and right in the middle of the Giuseppe Pannoni exhibition at the Pompidou Center, I unwrapped it and swallowed it whole. An instant, a gulp, a form of contemporary sustenance. Phew. But eating this did not nourish me. I couldn't have. Both my stomach and brain are blocked up. I shouldn't have. And what does this venerable cultural institution suggest to satisfy my emerging hunger, stimulated by the smells of the walls of laurel that make my head swim, by the malicious appeal of the human effigy potatoes of Pannoni? Nothing. A kick in the backside. Keep moving. Don't touch. There's nothing to eat. If you're hungry, try a mushy sandwich at the cafeteria on the ground floor to the left. You can't miss it. It's right next to the toilets. Eating in an exhibition is forbidden. I just fancied a bowl of rice cooked over a slow flame with just a touch of laurel, the same as Pannoni's. I would have enjoyed it right there, sat down on the floor and crossed my legs. I would have taken immense pleasure, even if it would have burnt my fingers, the potato cooked in clay with a slice of bloody beetroot with some coarse salt. While contemplating the work, I should be able to participate in the cosmic, the universe. What it really boils down to is how our senses, especially taste, take part in our understanding and comprehension of the world around us. In other words, how can we penetrate more intimately into the works hanging on the walls and those that might appeal to taste? Like a museum mediator who analyzes a work, conversing with a visitor, making feelings aroused, emotions illuminated, pertinence, the substance of the work. Cooking can also be this type of interpretation, a prolonged commentary on the work, and might even suggest a tastier interpretation. In 2005, the Contemporary Art Museum of Val-de-Marne, the MacVal, opened its restaurant. the transversal, where art cooking was shown with brio and realism. The freedom granted to the transversal project represented a rare occurrence in the field of cultural institutions. Among similar experiences, we can recall that of the Guggenheim restaurant in Bilbao. It is within this dynamic encounter and exchange between chefs Inaki Azipart and Laurent Chéreau, while the artist Jacques Monnoret, the father of narrative figuration, had an exhibition called Monolapin. Lightly browned rabbit with vegetables cut into strips and broth poured live, which coming into contact with the meat was transformed into a type of blue-colored veil, all under the auspices of the multi-talented Gilles Stassard, the creator of the food design column for Beaux-Arts magazine. Other interactions took the shape of taste visits while moving a buffet accompanied a museum guide during the visit. So spectators were invited to taste. What was the most memorable for myself was a chocolate truffle and black pudding that was absolutely devoured in a room that had been consecrated to the artist Gina Payne, who was the founder in the 1970s of the body art movement, Art Corporel. The bitterness of the cocoa, the caress and pressure of the tongue to break the chocolate shell and reach the heart of the bonbon, which could be unimaginably bloody. Gina could have hurt herself again and again. It was so good. And culture becomes flesh, and flesh our great trivial pleasure. Another center for artistic creation and production can be found at numéro 104, Rue d'Aubervilliers. The 104, and is the only one of its kind in the world. This former pompe funèbre is indeed unusual, with over 39,000 square meters, a sort of architectural temple to all the arts that brings together different forms and brings art out of its archaic shell to meet the public head-on. It's a place where the unique nature of artistic language can be used to offer an experience anchored in everyday life, a space where artistic vigor can redefine the frontiers between art and audience. Art and culture are open to anyone who just decides to drop by. It was here that Marc Bretillot was inspired to create Soup Kitchen, and indeed it is not just a dialogue within a cultural space, but a rethinking and revitalization of social links that are what these cultural institutions were created for in the first place. With French chef Eric Trochon and sound designer Philippe Chaimovich, they created what they called a participative culinary experience. Tables were built higher than normal at face level, and in fact were set up in a circle or a ring. The participants, or public, were invited to cook a big pistou soup. The sound, the bright lights, served as a device to create tension, a tension that is similar to the rush of a kitchen in a busy restaurant during lunchtime. At the moment of tasting, everything becomes quiet. Attention is focused on perception, a moment to share, a task completed. Then conversation can begin. This performance, created by three entities which move elliptically within each other, a sound designer, a chef, a food designer, is questioning the act of cooking as a surface of exchange within a polysensorial space that reaches out to each and every participant, all within the constructs and confines of a city-funded cultural institution. The next project that will be done at the 104 will be in the spring of 2013 and is called Scientific Banquet. It considers questions how cultural institutions might be parlayers of how food is radically changing the world around us. The theme is gaspillage et pillage, which I personally translate as waste and rape, because it considers a primordial question. The team of post-diploma students at ISAD and Marc Bretillot are working on this project, and considering that with 4.5 billion tons of food production every year, somewhere 30 to 50% which never finds its way onto our plate but directly into the trash, they certainly have their work cut out for them. Food design is rapidly becoming a new discipline in art design and consumer culture, while expanding exponentially with collaborative projects initiated by people all across the world. And yet, food design has existed since we were children, to know what we would eat, what we wouldn't. A natural response to an ever-asking question, how do we eat? Food design touches much of who we are on a daily basis, but it also touches on who we once were. Each act involves so many memories that designing each and every one does not have to be insurmountable. It has to be accessible. It has to be relative, important. It has to last, doesn't it? One of the reasons is that it not only gives us life, but inevitably defines who we are. Let's move on to artists, and I want to talk to you about Miriam Simon, a New York artist that introduces small revolutions into everyday life. Using installation, video, and performance, her work invites viewers to see new possibilities into the mundane. Human Cheese is a project that entails a socio-technical and economic system for sourcing, making, and distributing human cheese, positioning it as a real commodity. Sourcing human milk via the internet, then making the cheese in her kitchen, she adopted the storytelling practices of small-scale artisanal food brands. Human Cheese culminated in the Lady Cheese Shop, an installation at the Michael Mutt Gallery on Manhattan's Lower East Side, where there was a taste happening of ethically sourced, locally made cheeses made from the, quote-unquote, original natural food, human milk. 2 cheeses were made from local Manhattanites, like Chelsea and Midtown, and then 1 was imported from Wisconsin. You all know Wisconsin cheese, I'm sure. The milk was purchased and donated via internet, FedEx, and in person. In the face of uncertain bodily, technological, and food futures, Human Cheese provoked a space for discourse around norms and practices with regards to food production, emerging bioavailabilities, and the commodification of the human body, or the female body. Her next project is being sponsored by Creative Capital, and it's something called Eat Your Future, so that's something to look out for. For Human Cheese, she was featured and edited by someone else that I really like as well. I have a lot of respect for Marij Vogelsang, who is a food designer in the Netherlands. And we call her Eat Love, Marij Vogelsang, because she just kind of defines herself as a designer who loves to eat. And she shared her passion for food by first initiating and curating at Eindhoven's Design House in June of last year, one of the first international exhibitions that brought together some of the most important foodies working across Europe and the rest of the world. Food Culture, Eating by Design was an exhibition that also featured a pop-up workshop by the Florence-based women's collective Arabaschi di Latte called the Pasta Herbarium, where visitors could experience making pasta and sauces from scratch with some of the most unlikely ingredients. But how might we bring all of these people together? Not just designers, not just chefs, not just artists, restaurant owners, or the like, but also concept makers, trendsetters, futurologists, shop owners, mass distributors, local farmers, anyone who considers food as a key not only to their enterprise, but to the future of us all. As people become more aware of how we eat and even more conscious of eating habits, product, packaging, graphic, interaction, and service designers and strategists are going to parlay how eating will impact our daily lives and decisions. Not only will they give us qualitative selection, which we are striving for considering the world today, but they will also transmit new ideas about objects and instruments, ways of eating, ways of delivering food, and even ways of education. My question is, should we be wary of this? So from the material, how do we imagine the immaterial? How do we bring these people together, give them a voice? Well, in January of 2012, Marc Bretillot and myself, along with a young designer, Jean-Charles Aimé, launched a video platform called Thinking Food Design, and this not-for-profit project attempted to give voice to what is happening in the world of food, not necessarily design. Those that were interested in imagining their definition of food design were invited to send us 2-minute videos, and this platform was a way to share their experience about food, the food that comes home with us, the food that stays in cupboards and refrigerators, crossing kitchens, crossing continents, crossing places where kitchens are possible and even impossible, because after all, food is the common language of us all. We like what we eat, what we buy, what it makes us. We will all continue to do so, and by sharing our ideas, speaking about production, longevity, cost, taste, choice, environments, urban, rural, we might all come to table together and share an experience which is beyond anything that can be done alone. The thinking food design platform is fueled by accessibility, getting informed, sharing ideas, living in a world that is organic and expansive, that is collaborative and participative, a world that is smaller, much smaller than we ever anticipated, a world that is a living network, much like here today, much like Transmuseu, with the people that have participated this week and the generosity and passions of the facilitators and helpers at the MAM. I was originally going to conclude this small paper by saying that food is design in itself, but let me just tell you that after spending almost 2 weeks in this amazing city on my 2 feet, walking around, that I'm reminded in stealth that it is only life that is design in itself. Thank you.
As I sit in the kitchen studio in London, cooking stuff, building stuff, making stuff, and generally just really trying to put smiles on people's faces when they come to one of our installations, one of our events, and sit down with their friends. The PowerPoint, as you'll see, you're seeing an interesting cropped image as well, because I think the screen resolution is slightly odd. So you're missing some bits over there, but it's much like this side as well. We're mainly known for jelly. But what I was going to talk about today is just looking at how he starts off almost very, very naively, working with something at a medium that we loved with very sort of modest ambitions, and moved working with food from the market stall to the museum, and so thereby sort of just exploring and throwing into relief how food can move into art. I then look at some of our sort of working practice and some of the projects that we've done, and because what I'm really interested in is how all those boundaries are breaking down, how it's not only food coming to the art galleries, but it's artistic practice, and again, in fact, many other disciplines moving into the food world. And I'm really excited about how different knowledges are suddenly now being applied in food with all sorts of astonishing results. And I'll tell you about some of the things that we've drawn on, not being professional chefs, but with a lot of pressure sometimes to deliver an extraordinary meal to try and give people an amazing time. And then I'll sum up with a message of hope, our vision for the future, and exploring one of my favorite chemicals as well, and trying not to get it everywhere because my hand's been just looked like a color of a zombie's or something since it exploded in my luggage over here. Anyway, so I'm Sam Bompas. I'm one half of Bompas Parr. I'm the one that talks more, basically. We do things like making cigarettes of flavor, artisanal chewing gum factories, with 40,000 different flavors of chewing gum that people can make themselves, and kids are great at it, really interesting palettes. Whiskey Tornadoes just built that literally and launched it on Monday. That was part of a chocolate waterfall you can see flowing at a rate of 12,000 litres an hour. It's actually 4 tons of it. It was pretty epic. We're probably not going to work with chocolate again. It's quite challenging, but we can talk about that. But we're known for jellies, and jellies has been, in fact, it's mainly the problems with jellies and the problems inherent in using jelly as a medium that's taught us a lot about food. So I'll tell you our tale, and hopefully there'll be some insight. So one half of two, I'm Sam Bompas, and Harry Parr, my business partner, is trained to be an architect. To use a sort of cookery analogy, I probably do the front of house, and indeed when we started off, I would always orchestrate all the front of house. Harry would be in the kitchen cooking. So I tend to sort of come up with ideas, make problems, and then turn to him and say, Harry, we've only got 3 weeks to build a chocolate waterfall or something. How are we going to do it? And then he furiously works to make it a reality, and make it real. But we started off 5 years ago with very modest aims. We just wanted a stall at London's foremost food market, which is called Borough Market. It was somewhere between mine and Harry's house. And here we are, the first job that we did, we put together, and we literally sat down for about an hour, put together an idea for what we're going to be as a company together. Bompas Parr, didn't take long to think about it. Did a load of branding, got registered as a company, put together a business plan, approached Borough Market, said, look, we really think that you need fabulous English jellies on your market store. What do you think? And they promptly said, no, they weren't interested at all. So it was an immediate setback. But I think that was almost a go to creativity, go to working harder and seeing where we could go. And we've been on an incredible adventure ever since. The other problem that we really had as well is, we knew that if we're making fine English jellies, you get those beautiful antique copper molds, and they look extraordinary. They're absolutely beautiful. The only problem was we couldn't afford any of them, because you go down to the market and they're antiques, and people look at them and they put them on their shelves and they maybe polish them a bit. They probably don't cook with them, and we certainly couldn't compete with the other people in the market to buy them, because it'd be £400 or so for each one. So it's a bit of a problem, because we wanted to have this great jelly company, but we didn't have any tools to make any of the food with. So that's when Harry turned to his architectural training and worked out that actually using the sorts of programs that he had been learning to work with to design buildings, he could actually design, rather more humbly, jellies. And so he started off making these sort of architectural jelly forms. And this is the first one we ever did, and I think it's actually probably the best. And so not really improved on it. And it's a mould of St. Paul's Cathedral in London. And that's what it looks like as a jelly, and it's beautiful. And then we thought, well, if we've now got, so I'll pass this around. So that's Durham Cathedral in Durham. Cathedrals are really good. So what we do is we design it in CAD and then rapid prototype that. That gives us the tool which we're then able to use to model very cheaply using food-safe PET plastic jelly molds. We can really rip them out. We thought that now we knew how to make these molds, let's try and really push ourselves as well, because nothing good happens if it's not difficult. So we challenged the world's architects to send in their ultimate designs. And they could send it as a CAD file, they could send it as like a sketch, any way they liked. It just had to, the resulting jellies had to be quite small, like 15 centimeters by 15 centimeters. And we'd make it for them. And this was in 2008. I think the economic climate meant that a lot of architects at the time had a little bit more time on their hands than they'd actually like. And it was an idea that delighted them. So we got loads and loads of results. It was great. Some were better than others. This one, which is a jelly bridge, it's the Millennium Bridge, just outside Tate Modern in the UK. It was designed by Lord Foster, one of the great British architects. I don't know if anyone knew the history of the bridge itself, which was designed in 2000, but they actually had to go in and re-engineer the entire structure because it was wobbling too much. The exact same thing happened with this. I think as Lord Foster projected himself into the jelly and was thinking about it, didn't think quite hard enough, because every time we made it, and it's a very complex mould, it would just be a sad U dip in the middle, and we'd send it through to Foster's, and they'd said, no, it has to be totally straight. We're like, it's jelly. A much more successful design was this by Roger Sturck Harbour and Partners. I still don't know what program they used to render it, because this is actually a render rather than a photograph. Beautiful. But we made it in every different, so this is Baracas Airport in Madrid, and every sort of modular element is a different flavour. And it's really good in terms of fresh fruits for when you're in the reds, and then you go into the oranges and yellows, still going strong, lots of fruits, those colours. Then you start getting into the turquoises and the blues, and which are out there cropped out of frame. And they just ran out of inspiration. How many natural foods and fruits do you know that give a blue colour? So they started getting into sort of alcohols and absinthes and things like that. But we had all these marvelous different jelly designs. We thought, now's the time. Let's do a great exhibition of them all. And we said, well, right, we'll have a jelly banquet. We put tickets on sale. and 2,000 tickets sold literally over a weekend. At which point we thought we had a really big problem because we were going to have 2,000 people coming in, and we're going to display our jellies. But as you can see from the jellies in front of me, they're not very big. Because if you have a very large jelly, and we've tried to make very large jellies, the weight of the liquid in them just means that they tear themselves apart, and you end up putting more and more gelling agent in them until you get something that's like a rubber bouncy ball. You'd never want to chew it. It's absolutely disgusting in terms of texture. But anyway, we thought, okay, well, we've got this problem. Thousands of people going to lynch us. Lot of trouble. But let's look at the good things about jelly, the really exciting things, and see how we can use it to bring the space to life. So one of the brilliant things about jelly is obviously the wobble. I'm still fascinated by it. I still look at it all the time. It's just lewd. It's provocative. So we created this massive. This is very distracting. Created this enormous 10-meter-long jelly table, and the whole thing had a big wobble engine, so it was pulsating as it went along. The other thing that was great as well is jellies are like optics. They're like a lens. They distort and play with light. So we had this light installation underneath it using perspex as fiber optics, and the jellies at the top as lenses. So as it got darker, they sort of started really sort of shining out. They looked beautiful. We also sort of just distracted people with performers. So we had a budget of £40 for jelly dancers, and we called up one of the top dance schools, and they gave us some dancers to perform along to this. We worked with an ear surgeon and sound designer to record the sound of jelly wobbling, which sounds absolutely disgusting. And these people were dancing along beside him. And it was quite funny as well, because the 2 days before, we were on the top radio show on the BBC, which is one that was normally quite terrifying, but the presenters couldn't do anything except for laugh. So we got off quite easy. It was trying to determine what was architectural jelly. But they heard us on that, so they swapped out. Little did we know, all the dancers they'd given us were the rubbish ones, the sort of B team. But they thought, oh God, if it's going to get this much publicity, let's give us the A team. So they put in better dancers. And it was interesting. It started off quite scholarly. People were standing around looking at the jellies. It's very interesting because there's almost a total sensory assault. We had the jelly smell. We had the whole place was scented like strawberries. We had the jelly soundtrack. We had this jellyscape as well, and it slowly sort of devolved into more and more chaotic. The chef Heston Blumenthal very kindly came to be a celebrity judge of all the jellies, but here he's sort of, you can see him in the very bad photo just there. Here he is just actually a bit more worried about being pulled into the steaming jelly pit at the end. But it was amazing, and we learnt a lot that has since informed our approach to food and our approach to design. And I was standing by this one young chap, and as I said, when you make jellies, you end up putting. We tend to do a jelly when we're doing jellies. Do jellies for display and jellies for eating, because the jellies for display you quite often want to last out for ages and ages and ages. The jellies for eating you want to be like a loose set and sort of dissolve in the mouth. So we had these display jellies, and I knew that I'd made them just with loads of gelatin and also with paint, basically. That was all it was. But the smell of the strawberries, the sounds, the colour of them, meant that I was standing next to this guy, and he took a bite out of one, which I was a bit annoyed about because it was kind of supposed to be the exhibition. But it's good. But he turned around and he said, "That's a brilliant strawberry." And I'm sitting there going, "God, I hope the paint doesn't grip his stomach." And it was actually food dye. It was safe. But we sort of learned something, that if you're designing with all these other senses in mind, then you can really turbocharge what's on people's palates. And that was sort of an interesting lesson that learned for us. So we've then gone on a jelly adventure since then, doing jellies all around the world, jellies at people's weddings. Weirdly, you can't really see it all, jellies at people's funerals. And this started off as just something fun to do, because at Michael Jackson's funeral, we worked with a restaurant, we served funereal jellies, the waiters all had one like white glove, and we soon found ourselves actually in Australia's oldest funeral parlour, giving a talk on funereal foods, and there is a very interesting history of funereal foods. I think there's no book currently written on it. It would be a fascinating book to write. And we're working with people from the Chinese community, people from the Greek Orthodox community, people from the Christian community, and they're all talking about their community's funeral foods and traditions. And then after that, we had to come on and talk about why jellies were related to funereal foodstuffs. And they actually are, because there's a lot of moulded foods with funereal foods, particularly in Yorkshire, where you get given shortbread biscuits in the shape of cockerels crowing. Well, you wouldn't when you're dead, but your family would pay for these biscuits to be given out to all your friends as an announcement of your death in the shape of Masonic symbols if you're a Freemason, skulls, death's heads, cockerels crowing representing the resurrection. It's a weird way to learn about your friend's death. Anyway, jelly's taken us everywhere. So we made a massive map of America. We've done all sorts of things, and that was really interesting. Jelly at fashion shows, jelly explosions, and finally, jellies took us into museums. It seems an amazing culmination of an epic journey. Here's one that we built, and this was a sort of glowing jelly, but using quinine to make it fluoresce, and then UV light. So it's a pretty easy trick. At San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. It was great, and it's very much talked about as a performance, namely because it was up for an hour and then everyone ate it, which was interesting, but it filled me with a lot of joy. And I think one of the most interesting sort of experiences of food going into the museums that we've had was for the Barbican Art Gallery in London, and they were doing a show on surrealism and domesticity and the interrelationship between the two. And they asked us to say, can you come up with a domestic sort of art piece that would be food related, that would bring it to life? And it was really interesting, because we thought, okay, what's the most mundane food stuff that everyone in the UK really knows, like just boring food that you have as part of your everyday life? And we thought that jam was the thing. And we're interested in the surrealist take on sensationalism and jam and slightly unusual things. We worked out how to make different jams infused with various artifacts. One of them was wood from Nelson's ship. Another of them was sand from the Pyramid of Egypt. But the thing that really caught, and we called it occult jam, is looking at the surrealist interest in occultism and sort of immortality, and jam, preserving fruit, is doing a similar sort of thing. But the one that really caught people's interest was putting a tiny speck of Princess Diana's hair in a milk jam, and you just saw sort of people just go crazy around the world. And the guys at the Barbican said, well, how much do you want to sell this stuff for, this jam? It's, you've got hot demand. We said, well, it's kind of spread, it's jam, you put it on your toast. I hope people are going to eat it, because that's what has to happen. Not put it on a shelf. So we said, well, £6. They couldn't imagine anyone reasonably charging more than that for a jam. These are very small pots as well. They're about 250 mils. They weren't, large pots. And only a couple of weeks ago, saw that someone had just bought a pot of it for £600 on the internet, which I hope they got a really clean jam making process, so it's still edible, because that's important. But anyway. You can't see all of this. So all of our experiences with making food and the learnings on that have contributed to our approach now to food, which you can't really see. It's a German word, Gesamtkunstwerk. I can't even really say it properly. I'm sure if there are German speakers here, they could shout out a correction. No, it's Wagner's approach to opera. So it's looking at total work of art and looking at designing for all the senses. One of my favourite academic papers ever was one written in 2003 by Professor John Edwards. And he took a dish, chicken a la king, which is what gets tipped over Tom Cruise in Cocktail, And he served it in a lot of different environments. So he served it in an old people's home, he served it in an army barracks, and student halls of residence, and a really fine dining restaurant with beautiful white linens and tablecloth. And he got people to rate it. And the more salubrious the environment, the higher it was rated. So in the old people's home, they said it's stringy, it's disgusting, it's unsatisfying. In the fine dining restaurant, they said, oh, that's tender and moist, so succulent. And good value for money as well, even though they're paying more for it. So yeah, that led us to believe, and actually even before we did any of the jelly stuff, our very first job was, that anyone had ever wanted to pay us for, was at Warwick Castle doing a 12-course Victorian breakfast. And this is mainly because until then we'd only been making jellies in a very humble way for sort of Boy Scouts. Some of them didn't even want the jellies. It was weird. But someone called us up and said, "Can you make a jelly the size of a castle, in the shape of a castle?" And of course, at that point for us, it was impossible. But I kept them on the phone because here we go. Someone actually wanted us to do something for them. But we ended up doing this 12-course Victorian breakfast, and people didn't want to get. Well, I was a bit nervous about the thing, but people didn't even want to get up at the end of it. But it might have been something to do with the Burgundy, the Madeira, the champagne, the creme de menthe, and the whiskey that had gone into making the breakfast. But what was incredible was the setup of the room, the opulence of the room, so coding people's taste. And also because at this point in 2007, we'd never been in a professional kitchen, and there we were. In a kitchen that we're cooking for that meal out of 3 kitchens. I called Harry up when I was picking up all the cutlery, the 1,000 pieces of crockery to serve it. I said, "What are you doing?" He's like, "I'm practicing turning the oven on." I'm like, "Right, well, Harry, I'm going to be a little bit late. What are you going to carry on doing?" He's like, "Well, I'm going to try again, so I'm really ready at turning the oven on when you're here." But what we were able to do was Harry again turned to his architectural training, and by choreographing the food movement out of all the different kitchens in a very, very detailed schematics, and giving every single of our friends who were pretending were waiters very complex cheat sheets, it meant that nothing went awry. All the dishes arrived very, very promptly. So the breakfast didn't groan on for ages. We thought, wow, this is great. If you start applying those architectural techniques, maybe we can do almost anything. We started looking at what are all the different disciplines we can push into food, and what would the end results be. So for us, it's been very, very important looking at environments to code tastes. That's having dinners in Masonic temples. This one is in a Victorian, basically cathedral to sewage. It's the pumping works where all of the South London sewage used to go through, and it's for the museum, the Welcome Collection, and they were interested in dirt, so we did a dirt dinner there. Well, this is for a friend of mine's birthday, and she really liked gold things. And to be honest with you, if you eat an environment with that full on, the food is of course paramount. It's very, very important, but the environment gives you so much sort of extraordinary things to look at that. You get a bit more leeway. So I think our sort of thing over the past, because one of the things that we're always really intimidated by as well is we come from being not professional chefs to doing dinners which people pay often hundreds of pounds to be able to attend. Now, if I pay that much money for a meal, I expect it to be absolutely extraordinary. And it's even worse these days as well, because you're on new media, you're on Twitter, and someone sits there and they write, "I'm going to this dinner by Bompas Parr tonight, looking forward to the best meal of my life." And you sit there and you think, God, the pressure's on this person's got an anticipation of the best meal of their life. So you can see this is, sometimes we'll look at the furniture and design. So here we worked with a load of electricians to put about the amount of power that goes into power a city block into those gherkins, and creating an entire chandelier out of live gherkins. Makes it sound like someone being electrocuted when it goes. It's quite exciting. It's very, very dangerous. If someone goes near that, they'll die instantly. Or using the sorts of tricks that we're interested in pancakes, and how pancakes is a bit of show cookery. And so we work with Golden Syrup to put together a food magic kit. and like I loved it when you were young and you got those magic kits which would enable you to do all these sorts of tricks. But you'd open the kit up and it'd actually kind of be a bit boring, and you'd see a few dice and a piece of string, and the magic kit would be a great disappointment. We wanted to do actually a real, genuine food magic kit so that people could impress their friends, impress their family for Pancake Day with their own food magic. So we worked with genetically modified bacteria to create a bioluminescent enzyme. And there's some guys up in Cambridge at the moment doing it with jellies that glow and pulsate and fluoresce. So it's called a project called Sin City that we're able to make these sauces with, and it's really quite beautiful. It's genetically modified E. coli, by the way, so a bit terrifying, but it was safe. Or working with neuroscientists to look at the pleasure that goes on in people's heads as they're eating an ice cream. And so taking feed-outs like pulse, facial expression, EEG, degurgitation, which is a swallow reaction, and then using that to create a projection of sound and light inside this enclosed environment as they're eating. And it's really, really powerful and slightly unsettling when you're in there. Or working with pyrotechnicians to do sort of food explosions. Or in this case, when we flooded a building with 4 tons of cognac-based punch, based on, well, actually, we found out that a 17th century admiral in Britain had done a similar sort of thing. Lord Edward Russell, in 1694, flooded a fountain in Alicante with quite an alcoholic punch, and he was celebrating a massive naval victory, and they had a party for 6 days, and only stopped once when it started raining because they were worried that punch would be diluted. And so they put a canopy over it, and they had a small boy in a boat, and they would serve out all the officers. And we thought, wow, if you can do this, in the 17th century, why can't you do it now? And so we then did a 6-month research project, working with an architectural tutor who specialised in illusion, the engineers Arup and London's-based food safety units work out theoretically, could people boat across a lake of alcoholic punch, then drink it, and it tastes good, and not be cross-contaminated? Because there's, when you're working with this, there's a real danger of, if you do things inappropriately, of giving someone a very badly upset stomach, which is never worth it. So you has to always be safe. So it's just looking at how you put all those different things together. And I think one of our most recent projects last September, which was building a really classy drive-through for London. Sort of puts it all together. So it's using lots and lots of different experts, lots of different disciplines, and throwing them all into food just to create an almighty sensation. And this had to be sensational, because when you have a drive-through, you only have good drive-throughs, you only have literally 180 seconds or so between someone coming, placing their order, getting all their food dispatched, and getting the right order as well, and then them driving off. And so it needed to be like pretty pumping and exciting. So we worked with light artist Jason Bruges Studio. This is the order box. You had like literally the voice of God commanding you to order and taking your order. And you also had, at the same time, we worked with a perfumer in New York to create these sort of meat-based salami to dangle from your rear view mirror as Dawn Goldworm, and just create the right scent and atmosphere in the car. Because the great thing about cars, you can really control that environment. Worked with a composer to create a Mortadella-based soundtrack to choreograph it, and of course troops of roller girls as well to do a ripping show as people drove through, and light artist Jason Bruges Studio to choreograph all the lighting. So it's really sort of like hypnotic. It's like literally going through a grand hotel through hyperspace, and then you got your takeaway food, which is pretty hairy and muscly. Wasn't that, but we did want something for the people that came on foot, and there was a revolving restaurant with a triptych called the 4 Horsemen of the Esophagus at the end of it. And working with bodybuilders and fast food together was it was a very strange day at the photo studio. But I think actually everyone's been holding on to the spoon for a very long time. I'll dash around and put these up around, and then everyone can tuck in. And so these jellies, this one is based on the mausoleum, the Melbourne War Memorial. This one's just a sort of pretty shape made. So you have a spoonful if possible. And the flavours are, let's sort of bring everything together. make quickly. The flavours are elderflower, violet, and healthy dash of gin as well.
No, I don't know what's going to happen.
Okay, so we've seen how, for me it's really exciting with food moving into the museums. And it's also really exciting with sort of artistry, but also other disciplines moving into the food world. And I love seeing the creativity that ensues. And I think the end sort of point that I'd really like is in the creative world, like working with food, like working with an artistic medium. I don't really think it matters how you define it. Is it art? Is it food? Who cares, as long as it's really, really good. And I think one of the things about good work and good creative work is you always know it when you see it. I think who was it that said that it's like pornography. You know it when you see it. I mean, what is porn? But you kind of know when it is. But anyway, so that one of the things that I'm really excited about at the moment, which I've got Don Regalia for, is everything's going out. It's not that bad. It's just a powerful dye. Is this stuff called fluorescein, and it's quite incredible. It's quite incredible stuff. So I'll move that out of the way as well. So we first ran across it when they use it in St. Patrick's Day to dye the Chicago River green. And, literally, it's done privately. It's done by the Guild of Plumbers. And the Guild of Plumbers have been doing it every year since 1960. And fluoresceine's used because it's slightly radioactive, but not harmfully so. It's also a food additive called yellow 7. But as it's slightly radioactive and it has this amazing trace element, it's used to put into the water to see where the leaks are. And it's also used to stimulate, by Coast Guard and environmental agencies, to stimulate oil spills. So you can see, you put it in the water, you see where it goes, and then you can practice and have a dry run in case there's an oil spill. And but the thing is with it as well, by the plumbers, when they dye the Chicago River green, they keep it a closely guarded secret, and they're very nefarious about it. They say, it's a vegetable dye, but we can't possibly tell you what it is. And anyway, we became really obsessed by it, and got hold of a sample of the Chicago water from St. Patrick's Day, sent it to the leading UK dye specialists, called imaginatively dyes.co.uk, and they said, and they came back very quickly and said, "Oh, that's fluorescein, no problem at all." And we said, "Well, can we get some?" And they said, "Yes, of course you can." And this is what I have here, and it's just quite incredible, because like just the tiniest drop of it, like one drop, will dye literally an entire litre, and it's just mesmerizing and hypnotic stuff. Somehow it absorbs all the light around it and then radiates it back out. And we're really excited because over a couple of summers ago, we were able to flood the roof of Selfridges. So working with a load of architects and design, technicians and an enormous amount of insurance to create a boating lake and float up bar, which is quite unusual. And then just last year, finally, to complete the circle, we realized the dream of actually making a really, really big jelly. And this was a boat called SS Great Britain. And it's surrounded by this glass plate, which they normally flow water across, which helps insulate the bottom part of the boat, which has got a dry rust. So it's this glass plate. And there was this competition pairing sort of artists with museums. And there were 10 different artists, of which we number one. Most of the artists said, well, you know what, we'll just come and give a talk. And we said, any museum in Britain could bid for the artists. And we said, you know what, we'll do anything the museums come up with an idea, and we'll have a go, because we think that'll be really fun. And so I think a lot of the other artists got about 3 bids. We ended up having 40, and they went to the public vote. And the SS Great Britain had said, we'd really like you to set our boat in jelly, which, and the only reason they said that was they thought they'd never win. And sadly, people in Bristol got wind of it, which is where it is in Bristol, and they went crazy for it. They really worked hard to get the vote out and make sure we did it. And we turned up and we said, okay, we're really excited about this. This is going to be brilliant. Let's do it. Really excited about making your. What's the budget? And they said, well, it's £500. And in order to be able to set it in jelly, we needed to make 55 tons of jelly, which is quite a lot. But we actually worked out, we had a lot of sodium alginate. We'd actually had a cornered the world market in sodium alginate. We said, well, we'll use this to gel it, and we'll provide that. You'll need to provide the labor to make all the jelly, because we can only do it, we're going to need 15 big guys to do it, because it's really, really hard work. And they're able to do that by getting in all the local people who had come out of prison and were doing their community playback. So you had all these sort of School of Hard Knocks fellows with scars across their faces, really tough. And we're just asking them very, very nicely if they could mix up a bit more jelly. But the end result was extraordinary. Had all sorts of people who wouldn't normally come to a museum, who had lived in Bristol for their entire life, coming down to see this Bristol landmark set, an historic boat set in jelly, and then have an enormous jelly feast. And so that was really, really wonderful. And I thought for me was a powerful reason to use food as a creative medium, just to see the smiles on people's faces. So thank you very much. It's awesome to come here.
Agora nós vamos abrir para as perguntas e eu gostaria de pedir que todos fizessem as perguntas sempre no microfone para a gente poder também traduzir para eles. Deixa eu ver onde está o microfone. Está aqui, desculpe.
O pessoal está comendo, não vai fazer pergunta. Está muito gostosa de latim.
Tem uma.
Oi, meu nome é Fábio. Parabéns para os dois. Congratulations for the speaking. Eu queria saber pelo Earl. Ok. Seguinte, quanto tempo que dura essa pós-graduação na França? Ele disse no começo, né, que já virou um curso. E do CERN, eu queria saber se você já fez muitos projetos. Eu vi que você falou que você fez muitos projetos para empresas. E qual foi o que você mais gostou de fazer, assim?
We're in our third year of post-diploma, and it's a one-year program. And the age is around 28 years old, so it's people that are already working as designers or artists, etc. I have to get Sam to come. I don't think he'd come for 1 year, though.
Amazing. That'd be brilliant. Thank you. In terms of which we've enjoyed the most, it's quite a difficult diplomatic question. In actual fact, we've been very, very lucky. When we started out, no one really wanted to commission us to do anything. So we just made our own projects, and we'd be there putting all the money in, so we didn't have to answer to anyone. And by the time anyone's really come to us and said, well, we'd really like you to create something, they've come to us because they've wanted us to, I guess, have our own idiosyncratic take on it. So we've been able to maintain quite a lot of creative control. And, you know, I'm sure it's not usual, but we've been really, really lucky in that most of the people we work with have just said, hey, like when we made the boating lake on the roof of Selfridges, that green image, that was for a company called Cargill, which is vast. they were launching a new brand of natural sweetener in the UK called Trivia. Harry, my business partner, said, look, we work really good to do good food. How can you go and speak to a sweetener company? And I said, well, let's go and find out more about it. And then we found out more about the journey that they'd been on, into I think the jungles to track down the stevia plant, which all the local tribesmen have been like, right, stevia plant, we've got this useless plant, it has no nutritional value whatsoever, it's just sweet, which of course in the Western world is a great thing. And so actually, it was incredible because when you're working in very small ways sort of creatively, you have very little chance to have an impact on what it is that people put in their mouths. So working with a big company like that, you actually have a chance to really shape what people put in their mouths. And they said, look, what we're really good at doing is making a product, bringing it to market. And what you're good at doing is, well, I don't even know how to classify it. So we're going to do what we do, and you just do what you do. And that was awesome.
Pode fazer, tudo faz.
Eu vou falar em português. Então, eu queria saber a relação do food design com pop art, appropriation, copies e, acima de tudo, vamos dizer assim, com ideia nova com coisas velhas. Qual é a relação disso? Porque, no fundo, o que se dá para notar que, basicamente, é pop art. Tudo, a arte não é de dentro para fora. A arte é feita de fora para dentro. Tudo que está lá fora é transformado em art design, ou food design, I mean. Então, eu queria saber o que ele tem para me dizer a respeito disso. Por favor. Obrigado.
Well, I mean, the art of eating is as old as humanity itself. So, if we could, transport ourselves into 2,000 years or 6,000 years in the past. But if we talk about 20th century artists, for example, I mean, you probably saw this on one of the 200 images that I showed. But there was a Brazilian artist, because I stumbled over to the Pinacoteca on Sunday and found many pieces that were done and inspired not just by food itself, but by the art of the table, etc. And this is by, I'm going to mispronounce it, Walter Cio Caldas. And I believe that's after 1959. So, and this predates Gordon Matta Clark, which is 1972. It's hard to, but I think it's what Sam said earlier. It's the question of, like, I don't think we live in a world where we need experts, but experts need to be able to go beyond their own expertise, so to speak, and be able to go beyond the frontiers that are set for themselves, intellectually, financially, whatever, socioeconomically. And if they can create dialogues with creative people, which is what I think my role in an art school is to do, is to encourage creative people to first identify processes that exist, and then take those processes and turn them inside out, upside down, sideways, right, left. I don't care, but if creative people don't do it, then somebody else is going to do it for them and for us. And we need creative people. And those creative people can be architects, designers, engineers, Sam Bompas, Felipe Chaimovich, Barbara Lima, etc., etc.
A minha pergunta é para os dois profissionais aí. Qual foi o momento que vocês sentiram confortáveis na transição, né? Que eu não estou lidando só com comida, com food, mas eu, nesse momento, agora é arte, instalação, ele é tudo, ou ele volta a ser o elemento da comida como matéria ou instalação. Qual foi o momento da ruptura, né? Na carreira dos dois, e vocês deram esse jump?
I'll go first. I think for us, we've never really, we spend a lot of time with people asking us what it is we actually do, which sounds like a pretty fundamental question. I'm very lucky because Harry Parr is an old school friend of mine, and so we talk lots and lots about not particularly anything. And we sit down in the pub, and basically we have conversations in the pub about what it is we'd like to do, what are our ambitions, what are our dream projects to work on. And I think everyone has those sorts of conversations with old friend of them's, lovers, acquaintances, whatever. Like, wouldn't it be cool if, fill in the gap. But then we're sort of geeky enough to just go and then spend the next 6 months, the next year, trying to learn what we need to do to make it happen, to speak to the right experts to make it happen. But in terms of the actual idea, we're not that concerned about how it's defined. It's just what's that core idea. And to be a really good, a really powerful idea, for us most of the time it just needs to be a very, very simple one, which can be summed up in 2 words, ideally. But then normally there's a whole, making a drive-through for Mercedes, as part of their Avant-Garde Diaries, which was a whole sort of arts program that they had, doing something in the cultural sector. Before, they'd worked with a lot of artists doing a much more traditional show. And they came to us and said, well, what would you like to do? And they said, well, you make cars, we make food. Let's build the drive-through that's the drive-through that should have existed. That's a really, really good one. But there was so much work that went on behind it and developing it all up that we actually subsequently wrote a 190-page book about it. But in fact, if you come to it, you don't need to read the 190-page book. You don't need to read all the essays about it, or the sort of research, or the cultural commentary. You just need to have a great time. So you can approach it at a very sensorial level, at a very simple level, like, hey, that sounds like a good idea, let's do it. Or get much more involved. But, I'm not too worried about definitions.
Nor am I. I think I grew up in Alabama and Georgia, if you can kind of imagine the food desert that existed there in the 1970s and the 1980s. As you all know, Coca-Cola is from Atlanta, Georgia. And I guess when I became very concerned about food, not food necessarily as a commodity, but the fact that why does food have to disenfranchise us? Why does food have to marginalize us? And then when, obviously passionate about contemporary art, and I started seeing, hey, some pretty smart, creative, wise artists are working with food. There's got to be something more. I don't know if this demarginalization is going to get to Mississippi or Alabama or Georgia, but it should. Food is the easiest, it's the easiest and at the same time most complex thing that we all have in common. And that to me is very fascinating. It's very strange. Mon Dieu, I live in Paris, can you imagine? The hierarchy of food? I want a world that is non-hierarchical. I want a world of exchange, of accessibility. I don't want the mortal's guide to fine dining. I want us all to be able to enjoy, experience, and food is a great mediator of passion and emotion.
Oi, boa tarde. Eu estava lendo ano passado um artigo do antropologista que trouxe a questão que quando a gente compartilha a comida, a gente mostra os dentes. Antigamente, nos primórdios, mostrar os dentes era querer atacar um ao outro. E como que é isso de comer junto, hoje em dia, mostrando os dentes, mas ao mesmo tempo compartilhando a comida? Aí ele traz a questão, será que a comida, a culinária, pode trazer a paz?
A gente estava conversando agora, na hora do almoço, sobre algo bastante próximo a isso, que é como a civilização ocidental armou a mesa de objetos que isolam as pessoas, em vez de manter a comensalidade humana, né? Como a evolução do uso de talheres e de copos chega a um ápice em que você fica murado para se isolar das outras pessoas por esses elementos que fazem uma mediação entre o corpo e a comida, ou seja, você não tem mais o direito de tocar em nada e muito menos de tocar na comida do outro, ou deixar que o outro toque na sua comida. Eu acho que a gente chegou num ponto de inflexão dessa curva. E eu acredito que isso tenha muito a ver com o desdobramento da revolução sexual nos últimos 40 anos, em que o corpo ele tem passado por uma crítica da sua repressão, né? Então, eu acho que a comida ela pode voltar a ser uma ocasião de encontro, e, nesse sentido, lugar para a paz. Mas nós ainda temos que rever uma série de instrumentos de controle social que estão mimetizados e naturalizados na nossa vida, num grau que nós nem sequer percebemos esses instrumentos de controle sobre o nosso corpo e sobre a possibilidade de relacionar com as outras pessoas que comem conosco. Então, por exemplo, quando um casal se casa, ele ganha um faqueiro. Isso é o início de uma família condenada ao isolamento. Quer dizer, é uma coisa que é absolutamente naturalizada, né? Você acredita que começar uma família significa educar os filhos para usarem aquele monte de bagulho que isolam as pessoas, né? E isso é parte de uma evolução da sociedade ocidental, que eu acredito que se exprime em primeiro lugar nas maneiras da mesa. Então, há uma série de componentes de preconceito social que impedem que a comida nos aproxime e gerem a paz. Por exemplo, o nojo que a gente tem de pessoas que comem com a mão. O grau de nojo, ele cresce na sociedade paralelamente à quantidade de instrumentos de controle na mesa. Então, isso implica também mexer com os nossos padrões de nojo. Enquanto a gente tiver nojo da pessoa que está do nosso lado comendo, a paz será impossível. Então, há muitos passos, eu acho, ainda, para que isso aconteça, e também entender que a radicalização do individualismo na sociedade de consumo é uma consequência desse processo civilizador, repressor, de isolamento das pessoas, né? E a gente hoje consome comida através da indústria. E a indústria nos impõe o isolamento ao comer. Então, isso também é um grande desafio. Quer dizer, como que você se junta com as pessoas quando cada um esquenta o seu prato no micro-ondas num determinado momento e você nunca consegue comer junto? Quer dizer, são uma série de componentes extremamente cotidianos que estão naturalizados, né, na nossa vida, que reverteram a principal característica da humanidade. O ser humano é o único animal cujos adultos compartilham comida. É o único animal. Ou seja, a nossa sociabilidade é uma sociabilidade comunitária porque nós comemos comida cozida. Sem o que, e essa é uma hipótese que não tem mais de 5 ou 6 anos na ciência, sem o que o ser humano, o Homo sapiens, não teria surgido. Hoje já se demonstrou, isso foi publicado no ano passado, que os neandertais comiam comida cozida há 1 milhão de anos. O ser humano só surgiu há 200 mil anos. Então, a hipótese no momento é que, evolutivamente, a diminuição do intestino, que transferiu a possibilidade para o aumento do cérebro, porque o cérebro humano consome uma quantidade boçal de energia, né, e não se entendia como tinha sido possível o cérebro crescer. Isso dependeu do domínio dos nossos ancestrais entre 1,5 milhão a 2 milhões de anos atrás começarem a fazer comida cozida. Isso permitiu diminuição do intestino e a diminuição do tempo de mastigação e, evolutivamente, uma transferência de energia para o aumento do cérebro. Ou seja, ser humano é, em primeiro lugar, cozinhar. Sem cozinhar, não teria havido ser humano. Portanto, comer é o que é a base da nossa sociabilidade, e compartilhar a comida é a base da nossa sociabilidade. Então, a gente está vivendo um momento de inflexão na curva civilizatória, em que a gente está se libertando de um processo de repressão muito cruel, né? E, por outro lado, a gente criou uma indústria da individualidade. Então, nesse momento, a gente está vivendo um dilema evolutivo. E eu não digo social, não. Eu estou dizendo evolutivo mesmo. Então, acho que é um momento tão rico na cultura que os museus estão entendendo que a comida precisa vir para dentro do museu, porque a cultura contemporânea depende da gente encarar isso, sem falar nas questões de sustentabilidade, ecologia e crescimento da população humana, né? Então, eu acho que o tema da comida, ele é essencial, e eu acredito que sim, a negociação da paz, ela passa pela comida e pela comensalidade.
I just wanted to add, and if food is basic, then I do seriously believe, and I believe that my comrades here concur that, I mean, human beings, we're meant to be creative creatures. We're meant to explore, go beyond so much, and what more perfect medium than to do that with in our daily life, with our family, with our children, with our friends, with our comrades, but food.
Or there's another point as well, which is if you want to be a good negotiator, make sure that you're the one doing the food as well. I think it was Talleyrand employed Carême to be his chef and spent absolute fortunes giving him the run of the best kitchens, the best places to cater, so he could invite everyone over, give them a really good meal, and then get a really good deal out of them diplomatically. So it helps international relations, but in someone's favor. Not everyone's.
Essa pergunta é para você, Felipe. Voltando um pouco no assunto que você estava falando, muito interessante agora, eu estava pensando um pouco, né, na palestra da manhã, falando um pouco do Dada, agora pensando um pouco do mundo que a gente vive hoje, pós-Bauhaus, enfim. Vivemos no mundo dos escritórios, dos quadrados, né? Nos definimos em mesas, em tudo. E o ano passado eu acabei visitando o Xingu e também estava lembrando nas conversas aqui, na questão de comer a comida etiopiana, a gente sentava em volta da mesa e todo mundo põe a mão naquele balaio, né? E existe uma arquitetura, né? Um pensamento circular em volta disso. E tanto dentro das aldeias do Xingu, você percebia que tanto a questão da arte quanto da comida, ela era feita desde manhã até a noite, acontecia tudo ao mesmo tempo e acontecia naquele environment, num ambiente circular, né? E eu lembrava andar na aldeia e depois estava sempre procurando aonde era o lugar que eu tinha que voltar. Porque eu me deparei e falei assim, nossa, eu realmente venho da sociedade das salas, dos quadrados, e eu estou me perdendo aqui. E eles tinham esse pensamento circular, fazendo tudo e com todos. E também comiam muito à mão. E eu pensei muito nisso, nossa, todo mundo pegou nisso, pegou naquilo. Mas eu fui comendo. Enfim, queria que você fizesse um paralelo aí, se você acha que tem realmente a nossa evolução, ou talvez o nosso regresso nesse sentido, né, do mundo das salas e dos quadrados e nesse pensamento circular.
Eu não sei se é uma resposta, mas o que eu tenho pensado a respeito disso, e você falou na questão da Bauhaus, eu acho que isso realmente é fundamental para a gente entender o nosso mundo quadrado, né? É que toda essa ortogonalidade que a gente identifica com a vida avançada, com a civilização avançada, né, a partir do século XX, essa ideia do reto, e que iria contra essa coisa mais, talvez, acolhedora do redondo, né, foi muitas vezes justificada como um progresso tecnológico permitido pela industrialização, que seria muito mais dirigida para as coisas retas, né, e que, portanto, a gente perderia essa linha orgânica, de uma certa maneira, que é característica dessa, eu diria, desse urbanismo circular, dessa arquitetura circular e dessa sociabilidade circular. No entanto, o fundamento desse horror que a Bauhaus tem e que difunde, né, de toda forma de linha orgânica, que no fundo é chamado de ornamento, vem de um argumento da teoria racial, e que é extremamente difícil para o modernismo do século XX digerir após o que foi o nazismo. Porque eu acredito que todo o modernismo do século XX, inclusive a Bauhaus, participam do mesmo argumento que o nazismo usou para falar de arte degenerada. O texto fundamental para isso é do Adolf Loos, é um texto de 1908 que se chama Ornamento e Crime, e ele não era nazista. Ele é a grande figura por trás da Bauhaus, por trás da reforma industrial na Alemanha e na Áustria na primeira década do século XX. E qual que é o grande argumento do Loos? Fazer ornamentação é um sintoma de um indivíduo racialmente degenerado. É essa a razão pela qual a Bauhaus bane com horror a linha orgânica. É falso o argumento funcionalista de que as máquinas produzem melhor linhas retas. A ideia de que você está sendo socialmente controlado pelas suas manifestações estéticas e de que alguém pode acusar você de ser um degenerado se você fizer qualquer coisa ornamentada, é um dos preconceitos mais complicados da gente desentranhar da cultura civilizada e do progresso modernista no século XX, porque isso está baseado num argumento racial, e isso não se fala. Esse texto do Loos sumiu da literatura, não por acaso, mas o Le Corbusier traduziu e publicou em francês em 1920, isso é uma das bases do purismo, e é isso que funda Brasília. Tá? Essa volta a situações em que você perde a referência cartesiana, como você disse, a gente se perde numa aldeia circular, né? É algo que eu não sei se é reversível nessa altura do nosso desenvolvimento industrial, porque, de fato, esse argumento do Loos se entranhou tão profundamente no desenvolvimento do design e da indústria de consumo, que hoje a gente tem muito problema em ser visto como uma pessoa que usa ornamentos em excesso, ou que tem uma casa excessivamente ornamental, ou que acredita que nós não somos uma linha reta, ou estamos restritos a pensar de forma quadrada, né? Então, quando a gente tenta reconstruir uma sociabilidade menos preconceituosa, e eu acho que a gente está realmente numa mudança de curva civilizatória, talvez a gente invente outras formas, mas enquanto não se fizer a crítica desse elemento da teoria racial que está por baixo da arte moderna, que define a evolução da arte do século XX, a gente não vai superar isso. Tem um ponto nevrálgico aí muito difícil de ser digerido até hoje, né? E eu não sei se isso vai ser encarado em breve. Me parece que ainda é um grande trauma do século XX. Então, eu acho que aí está um ponto muito difícil de... não sei ainda como isso vai ser transformado, mas eu acho que essa visão cartesiana de arquitetura, do mundo, do design, do mundo industrial, de uma certa representação de progresso, de civilização, está embrenhado de preconceito racial.
Eu creio que eu não fui bem claro no que eu quis dizer a respeito de pop art relacionado com a comida. Mas o que eu quero dizer é o seguinte, essa ideia desse encontro comida e arte, claro que é uma coisa que já existe, tem até um livro de receitas do Salvador Dalí dos anos 50, não é? Agora, eu vejo isso como pop art porque parece que não chega. E o que eu mais gostaria de ouvir, o que os senhores aí têm para dizer, é o seguinte, que é uma ideia assim meio de piada, uma coisa meio jokingly, é uma piada, não é? Ou realmente é uma coisa verdadeira. Quer dizer, é uma coisa comestível ou é uma coisa visível? É uma coisa para ser tocada ou é para ser cheirada? O que é isso? O que se pode explicar disso? Por favor, obrigado.
So Dali's book is one of my favorites. It's fantastic. I think we've done a lot of work exploring it. I think for us, we're really interested in. I spent a long time going around galleries, and spent a long time doing lots of other entertaining things as well. When we set out to create a meal, to create an installation, to create a project, what we really want to do is give people an extraordinary sensation, a memory, a fleeting experience that will last them for a lifetime. And I think when we always think of it, we just think, right, people have their very short, precious lives. Everyone, if you ask people what they're doing, they're always busy, all the time, non-stop. Why is it they'd want to come and do this, and how is this a valuable use of their time, and what do they take away from it? And that's how we sort of judge what we're doing. Not against anything else, not against art that exists, but is this a useful, on a personal level, on an experiential level? Might not be productive in terms of getting things built, but productive in terms of people choreographing the story of their own lives. I think our acid test on making things sounds quite simple. Sounds quite weird, actually. It's like if someone was going on a date with someone, and they're going on a date with someone they didn't know particularly well. They'd been set up on, say, a blind date, and the person they met with was beyond awful, was an unspeakable person. Would they still think that having spent an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours at the thing that we've created, that they'd actually had a good time with that? And so that's sort of our acid test. It's not a marvelously theoretical answer to your question, but it's just, this is our support, this is what our aim. So hopefully it's helpful in some way. But maybe one of the panel can say something more articulate.
Well, my idea is that truthful or not? Is that art or not? Because art's supposed to be truthful. Then what I'm seeing on that, not a real true thing. Because, if it's edible, you're going to eat and it disappear. And art's supposed to be resting, being there on time. What it is that?
I don't know. I think we all have different definitions on what art makes us do. When I started, let's see, 1981, the creation of MTV, CNN. I was in a very, very small town in Georgia. We had 350 channels, but we had no choice, and there was nothing like there is today as far as accessibility to understand who a Caldas is, who oh my gosh, I'm going to mispronounce it. Heliocisitata. Thank you. Yes, we live in a world now where there is multi-level access, many different mediums, many different informed conversations going on. Popular art in a Velvet Underground or 1960s New York, Yayoi Kusama, Andy Warhol, etc. Do we enjoy it? I don't know. I mean, if anybody's ever had a can of Campbell's tomato soup, it's disgusting. But I wouldn't throw out my print of Andy Warhol that I was hanging on my university dorm room. So again, I think what Sam said, if I could just wrap this around, it's about experience. And isn't art about experience? I mean, I'm not going to say that art is the sacrosanct temple of the 21st century that we all need to go worship to, or the gallery system, or the star system. No, I think art is supposed to give us emotions that we wouldn't normally feel by ourselves. And those emotions can be manifested in many different ways. Thank you for your
Na
question.
verdade, eu discordo totalmente do posicionamento do colega aqui. Eu acho que a arte gastronômica envolve mais sentidos do que a arte convencional e contemporânea. Eu queria saber um pouco mais de vocês três, qual é a relação das multinacionais e dessas empresas que são detentores das comidas, dos alimentos, como a Cargill, Unilever, Nestlé, em relação a esse tipo de arte, porque é uma arte extremamente humanizada, né? É uma arte, ele falou que não se conserva, mas a experiência que você tem no museu junto à gastronomia é mais do que contemplar um quadro, no meu ponto de vista. Então, eu queria saber um pouco mais sobre isso de vocês.
I just want to, before anybody says anything, the industrial system is, I mean, it's not petrol, it's not planes, it's not, it is intense factory farming, and I think you are very well aware of that in Brazil. That is the cause of 80% of global warming. When I talked about processes earlier and how young creative people, whether they're in cooking schools or art schools, design, architecture, etc., or even at an elite sciences politiques school, it is their responsibility to rethink these processes and create conversations with people in power and to make the world a better place. In 2050 or 2075, I cannot even imagine if people are eating like I was in 1975 in Georgia. So does the industrial, gosh, I went to one of the grocery stores here and I could have been in Birmingham, Alabama, or Paris, France, or Reims, France, or London, England. But when we come to the idea of art, yeah, maybe art can be sacrosanct. Maybe it can be something that at least can be a medium or a way of creating a conversation with industrials. But it's creatives that give control, and it's creatives that have the opportunity to dialogue for people like myself, for people like you.
I wasn't quite sure because I was sort of fiddling around with this and not really getting it to work yet. I'll get it by the end. What the reference you gave at the start was? Was there an individual, a chef, talking about?
That he disagrees from his colleague that may ask the question about pop art, because he thinks it's much richer, the experience of gastronomy in a museum than anything than of contemplating or anything.
Well, I think it's exciting because it stimulates on sort of many different levels, and it can be one that's very simplistic, or it can be one that's and it can be one that's like literally sort of like sort of so far below any sort of intellect. And I just love it when you're sitting on the plane over here, and they come round with the trolley full of disgusting food, and you see everyone's heads snap up, and they're just looking, they're fascinated by this trolley laden with alcohol and calories, and everyone intellectually knows that it's probably going to be enormously disappointing, but because there's this sort of exchange going on, people get really excited, and I think one of the things that food certainly does is just tap into the sort of inner beast that is people, and just speaks to people on that totally compelling moment. We've spent a lot of time trying to analyze what gives people a really wonderfully rich emotional experience, and food plays a really exciting part of that. We've looked at the architecture of cathedrals and places of worship and holy places around the world. We've looked at the pop book called The Game, which is like the rules of seduction to get a woman into bed immediately. We've looked at a lot of different disparate sources, and in terms of giving people a really exciting, thrilling, and wonderful experience, looking at the sort of architecture of theme parks as well, or like the narrative structure of films, and there are a lot of commonalities between all of them, which is really great, and food fits in with that wonderfully. So if you can give people some sort of sense of anticipation, an element of compression. Imagine going into the place of worship. There's normally a sort of a tight area, and then a great sort of reveal as well, where you sort of behold it all. Some sort of sense of risk, and that the risk could come before the sort of reveal. And then ultimately, a reward as well. And the reward is great if that's sort of food related. And then follow that by a sort of element of, or an area of contemplation or of reflection. And if you do that, that works kind of for everything from a movie plot line to a really great building that just works as an incredible building, a seduction, or a great project. And I think that's quite sort of fun. Although fun's not the right word.
Em relação ao MAM, a experiência que a gente tem tido com indústria alimentar foi de patrocínio. A indústria topou patrocinar as experiências gastronômicas no museu, mesmo sabendo que eram muito experimentais mesmo, sem a gente saber o que ia acontecer, né? Quando a gente fez o Festival Internacional de Jardins aqui no Parque do Ibirapuera com o Festival de Chaumont-sur-Loire, o tema foi alimentação, né? E a gente propôs para os artistas exatamente esse dilema entre o Brasil ser um país produtor de alimento ou de biocombustível. O que a gente vai fazer com a terra no Brasil, né? E a Nestlé patrocinou isso, eles toparam isso. Quando a gente fez agora os encontros de arte e gastronomia, a Electrolux importou da Itália módulos de cozinha gourmet de concurso e montou uma cozinha de ponta no MAM, para situações absolutamente imprevisíveis, como, por exemplo, a trilha sonora que foi feita no dia da abertura com os DJs usando a cozinha inteira como percussão, né? Então, eu acho que a indústria alimentar ela está consciente dos desafios de lidar com sustentabilidade, com a população mundial, né? Com o gasto de energia no transporte de alimento, com o desperdício, e isso são questões que a indústria está levando muito a sério. Então, eu acho que a colaboração dos museus com a indústria alimentar para possibilitar experiências limites como essa, eu acho que tende a se consolidar, porque a indústria sabe que ela não pode varrer a coisa para debaixo do tapete. Eu acredito que a indústria está precisando desse tipo de desafio.
I think, yeah, just to add to that, if you look at the history of sort of industrial food production, a lot of the really big industry players now were set up by people with really big hearts, that they wanted, people like the Cadburys or and Kellogg's as well. Their original aim is creating a product that people could trust, and that would be good for people and wouldn't poison them at a time when the mode of production was getting separated out from where things were being made were being separated from where things were being eaten. And the reason you create a brand is so that you can recognize it and you can trust it. At the same time, as their working forces expanded massively, they really looked after those people in how they proceed. And yeah, that's not least, because if they don't, they won't have, you don't get to the top of those companies if you're an idiot, ultimately. And I think one of the things that's really exciting is you have someone like Unilever, and they sponsor the main commission in the Tate Modern, in the biggest gallery in London. And isn't it even more exciting for them if their sort of media, why does that big commission have to be totally refined from what they actually do? Totally sort of separate from what they actually do. What they actually do with a lot of their food products has an incredible impact on people's everyday lives. Wouldn't it be interesting if those major art commissions could actually articulate an interesting story about what it is that they do and what's important to them, but also help change what they do as well. And so you have this sort of dialogue that goes both ways. Hope that made sense. Cool.
Bem, nós vamos encerrar agora a mesa redonda. Antes do encerramento, eu gostaria de convidar a todos... A mesa retangular. Antes de... Redonda em espírito. Gostaria de convidar a todos para verem a exposição Circuitos Cruzados, que está aqui no MAM. É uma colaboração do MAM com o Pompidou, e também para vocês retirarem, tendo interesse, o catálogo que acaba de ser lançado. A gente gostaria de oferecê-lo a vocês, e quem quiser também visitar a exposição pode pegar um selinho aqui na entrada e visitar gratuitamente. A gente também oferece a vocês, tendo interesse, o nosso livro do Grupo de Estudos de Curadoria. Eu gostaria de agradecer aos membros da mesa por esse debate extremamente relevante. Gostaria de agradecer a vocês pela presença hoje e nos 3 dias do Transmuseu. Para nós, isso é vital. O MAM precisa enfrentar questões de ponta em todos os seus setores. Esse foi um esforço de toda a instituição. Esse é um seminário que vem responder a dilemas nossos, né, para lidar com a arte experimental e responder ao nosso público e à sociedade, criando um museu que não seja excludente. Isso não é fácil para nós, e é por isso que nós precisamos que vocês nos acompanhem num debate como esse. Então, eu gostaria de agradecer em nome do MAM a vocês terem nos dado a oportunidade de refletir, de enfrentar nossos desafios e de crescer junto com vocês, que são a razão do MAM existir. Então, obrigado.